Excited to be here. And really, my goal here today is to do a couple things. One is to kind of introduce you all that don't know about this relatively new institute. I've been here for 7 months as of yesterday. I just brought on a new hire today. So things are moving quickly. We're doing good work. So it's introduce the institute, but also to talk about the larger framework of nature-based solutions, where things are headed here in the region, opportunities and also barriers that we're going to have to work very closely with partners on, including folks in the energy industry, government, health, conservation, many different sectors. So we're going to just give you kind of an overview. It's a little bit narrative. All of these issues are very complex. They're sitting within systems, which are in systems. But if you wanted to have a more kind of detailed conversation, I would more than welcome that. So I'm going to share screen. And let's see here. I'm going to have you guys do something a little bit different to kind of break the ice a little bit. I would like you to close your eyes for just a second. And I'd like you to take in a couple of deep breaths. And I'm going to play something for you. Hopefully, you will be able to hear it. We're just going to sit for like 20 seconds. All right. Larissa, since I can see you, you were able to hear that? You weren't able to hear that. Odd. Okay. I was playing some bird songs. Not sure why I wasn't playing, but we're going to go ahead and start our presentation. The main idea there is that when we talk about nature and nature-based solutions, we're really talking about something that can get pretty complex pretty easily. But it's also an invitation to connect with something that's very deep and meaningful. And so when we talk about nature-based solutions, we're really talking about working with nature to solve modern problems. But in the technicality of the work, sometimes we forget that there's a very basic human need is this reconnect to nature, and it's something that I'm very concerned with. I'm going to be going to give some opening address remarks and to hand out some awards at the Texas Children Nature Conference on Thursday in Bryan. And so as we get into this discussion about what we need to do to make our region more resilient, our state more resilient, um, just let's remember also that this is just a very kind of human-centered story that we're all connected to. All right, so real quickly, I am the executive director of this new institute called the Institute for Ecological Resilience. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. But this image here on this slide deck is really important to me. This is a group of UH Honors College students. They're taking a resiliency class that's led by Dr. Nick Jacobson, who's one of our early collaborators. And we're at the Memorial Park Land Bridge and Prairie Project. So if you have not been to Memorial Park here in Houston, I would highly recommend it. This is the largest land bridge in Texas. And this is emblematic of two of the things about this institute that we really would like to see. Debolina was very generous in including the institute and myself into the hackathon, which was an amazing experience. It was so good, and so we want to have a real focus on this generation that's coming up and really wants to get activated around nature for various reasons. So we'll have a very strong student focus. But we'll also be very focused on these sorts of on-the-ground interventions. So where can we play a role as a Tier 1 research institution that is urban? Where can we play a role in making the places in which we live, work, play, and for some of us worship healthier, more resilient, greener, and more enjoyable? And how can we use that ancient form of technology, these ancient ecosystems that surround us and are kind of the bones of this region? How do we work with that natural capital to do that? All right. So this I always put up very quickly because although conservation is my background, conservation is just one part of the puzzle for getting more nature-based solutions out into the world. But this is a truism no matter what the sector is working on. And it's the quality and the quantity of the nature around us that directly correspond to the health, resilience, economic vitality, well-being, and even longevity of greater Houston residents, both human and wild. And so we're going to have a very kind of comprehensive, inclusive framework for how we work on these issues. We'll talk a little bit about our framing, which is the One Health framing, a little bit later on. But um, we see differences in how communities are more or less resilient, more or less healthy, and enjoyable in many ways based on the built environment. What is around them that is helping them to maintain that level of quality of life? And not every community, as you know, has the same amount of nature. Not all communities enjoy the same health of the nature around them. So that's an important thing to understand. So, real quickly, this institute was really born, I think, out of a need to fill an unfilled niche. There are many academic institutions doing work across the greater Houston region, both that are located here and located outside the region. But we see that there's a need to have a research institution of U of H's caliber working on accelerating and amplifying the work that needs to happen here around research, around education, innovation. And so our mission, our vision really is to be a leading test bed for validating nature-based solutions in the greater Houston and Texas, greater Houston region and the Texas Triangle. But that being said, we really think that everything that we work on, if it's done correctly, can serve as a national model as well. Houston is, one of these places that I call Houston because it is a place where it is a very large area that is unzoned, which means that we don't have some of the tools in the toolbox that other places have. But it's also a great place to test drive things because it's not zoned. So for every kind of challenge, there is like this opportunity in Houston. And we're very kind of that's a very Houstonian thing to do is to really lean into that innovative space and to work with what you have and to tap into the superpowers that this region has. In terms of the mission, we're going to try to be as multidisciplinary as we can. My background is in ecological restoration, environmental education, environmental communications, and network weaving. But I've always worked in the last 10 years in a multidisciplinary way. And we're finding there's a lot of both advantages to that and reasons to do that, especially now that we need kind of an all hands on deck process. All right. I'm just going to move my little window over here. Okay. So why now and why UH? So Houston Galveston region sits really at this front line. I don't know if I need to tell anyone who lives in this region of extreme weather events, rapid urbanization, nature equity issues. And it's also one of the most biodiverse places in the United States. A lot of people don't recognize that. It's actually one of only two biodiversity hotspot cities in the US, LA being the other, which means that it has exceptional biodiversity, but it's under threat through development and other forces. So we have communities, both human and wild, that are very exciting, very dynamic, very diverse, and yet there are these challenges. So how can we be a part of that? Um, Nature-based solutions, why now? Because nature-based solutions are not the full gamut of solutions that we need, but they really can help us reduce some of the flooding issues, some of the urban heat island issues. So I've worked a lot in that area, improve air and water quality, restore biodiversity, and strengthen community and economic resilience. So there's a lot of work that's being done around the values of nature and civic space and what that does for your mental and physical well-being. So it's not just protecting people's bodies, what I say, in terms of protecting folks' lungs and their physical bodies in terms of flooding and heat and things like that. It's also about creating conditions which are healthier for us as just human beings that need that social connection and contact. Why UH? It's a very large urban university, tier one research university, so a lot of research power here and potential here in many different strengths. One of the great, wonderful things I've been able to do in these last 7 months is really to get to understand who's working on nature-related and resilience issues here at UH. And it's actually much larger than I knew before I came. which is a wonderful thing. So it's how do we leverage all of that brain power, all of that knowledge, and connect it with other sectors and other players in this realm to get to moving some of those levers in policy and finance in places where we need to move it. We already have a large network in place. Obviously, the university's been around for a long time. It's been growing in stature and impact, and it's poised to work in this area in a multidisciplinary fashion in the way that it does in other areas. The last piece is that we own a really biologically wonderful place called the UH Coastal Center, which is down in Lamar, Texas. So it's about 17 miles inland from the coast. It is a place that has one of the oldest, most valuable ancient old growth prairies left in the region. It's also a place where research is happening already, and it's a place where we think that workforce development can really, really take off, and we can showcase that. And lastly, and we'll talk about this, is this place is actually not just going to be a place for research and workforce development. That would be wonderful in and of itself. But as a seed source, where we desperately need seed sources to produce plants that can help stabilize and increase the resilience and health of our communities, it's also a seed source. So there are a lot of reasons why UH can step into the breach now and work shoulder to shoulder with partners across sectors. Okay, just real quickly with resilience, I think many of you know what resilience is, so I won't belabor the point, but it's really the capacity to adapt, recover, and thrive amid change. And if this world is anything right now, it is highly dynamic. With new technologies coming online, it's becoming ever more dynamic every day. And so this new UHIER, this new institute, is being incubated within one of the centers of innovation at the university, which is the Division of Energy and Innovation. It's actually a good place to be as we work towards independence in 3 years because there's so much innovation surrounding us and there's so many good connections to so many sectors. As far as ecological resilience is concerned, it really is just an extension of that resilience concept, which is how can our basic ecologies here, how can we work with them to make it such that we have better chances of adapting in a highly fluctuating world? Um, what we know is when our local ecosystems that surround us are healthy, we are more likely to be healthy. And to put that even kind of a more direct point, I always tell people if nature is sick around us, humans can't be healthy. It's a prerequisite. It's not that it's a add-on or a luxury or something else. If nature is sick around us, we're likely to be not as healthy, not as resilient, not as happy as we would otherwise. So, in terms of the disciplines, I just can go on and on about these disciplines. I'm working with folks at many different colleges at this point to try to find out where are those connecting points. And fortunately, we just brought on a research liaison officer today, Heidi Ballou, who's going to help me make the connections to our incredible researchers here at the university and beyond, because we want to work with many different universities to solve these puzzles. Um, all right. So our impact is really in quickly, so I can get to these storylines and provide some time for feedback and questions and things like that. Where we want to have impact is in research, obviously, education. So all those programs that Debelina was showing you that ETI is working on, it's amazing. I'm learning so much from Debelina. We want to have a robust educational arm for the Institute. We see that that could go in a number of ways, but credentialing is something that we will be working towards. We'll be having webinars. We've already had a first public event. We'll have some more public events in the spring semester. And then outreach, and the way that I'm looking at outreach, it's everything from on the ground project support to working alongside communities in terms of applied research that can help them move the needle in terms of nature. There are a lot of ways in which we can better support community and where we can work in synchrony with community and with other sectors. Where do we want to see this impact? Well, I call it the three C's. We absolutely want to have direct impact, a direct line of sight of impact for our Houston, Galveston communities in terms of getting more nature out there, getting more nature-based solutions out there, breaking barriers that are keeping the nature-based solutions from flowing on campus, because our campus is reflective of so many different landscapes across the region. And our campus sits within a community that is a triple heat community, which means it's at the highest level of vulnerability for heat, called the third ward. So we want to be good neighbors. We want to be connected with the rest of the city, and we want to be more resilient ourselves. And at the UH Coastal Center. And how are we going to do this? Well, there's a lot of ways forward for this, but basically, in order to make that difference, in order to be the best partner that we can be, we're really going to focus on having more impact because we're being more multidisciplinary. I come from the conservation tradition. Like I said, it's bedrock to my understanding of how to restore ecosystems for better human and wildlife health. But it's only one system. And so, how can we work with other systems like public health and energy and other sectors to make that happen? Next gen and emerging. So, we definitely want to keep an eye and be a player in how this next generation of workforce development has pipelines to careers. And when I say this next generation, we're talking about what is that pipeline between high school and community college, universities like UH and other universities. What are those workflows? How do they work? Where can we work with many partners around that? And then braided funding. So one of the things that we desperately need right now is more money to plant trees, to get pocket prairies in, to get green stormwater in. Some of the sources of income that we were depending on have gone away recently. So how can we work with folks maybe outside the traditional conservation field or even the environmental field to innovate in terms of financing nature and nature-based solutions? We're going to need a lot of new people that have incredible skill sets, but maybe haven't put work in this area in. And so I think one of the things that we're going to be looking to do very early on is to get funding from different types of funders, including public health, but conservation, resiliency, and others. All right. So just real quickly, as we get into the story, I'm going to keep it to 20 minutes. We'll have some time for questions. Everybody's journey is different in terms of how they got to where they are in terms of their career. As a young person, I wanted nothing more than to be a wildlife expert. And so a lot of my early jobs in my career were really about that. It was teaching and restoring on behalf of wildlife and wild nature. Certainly nothing wrong with that. I love being a naturalist. That's one of my great joys. But as I rolled along in my career, there were certain things that became very apparent. The city that I loved was in the midst of many different extreme weather events. We have had 18 federally declared disasters since 2000. So we are really at that leading edge of feeling impacts from heat, from winter storms, from flooding, from other things. And then as we continue to grow, and as the Texas Triangle continues to grow, and there are more demands on water, more demands on land, more demands on many resources, we're starting to really feel all of those pressures. And when I say we, I mean both the people and the wildlife that I came into this career for. So it really became apparent. And after Hurricane Harvey happened in August of that year, 1 month later, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, where my family's from. And so I felt a calling. Okay, so great. It's great to save nature for wildlife. It's great to save it for these traditional conservation values, but I'm being called in a different direction. So at that point, I took what would end up being a 6-year position with the Nature Conservancy, which is the largest conservation group in the world, to found what was called the Houston Healthy Cities Program. And it was all about where can we get nature out into the community. So some of the work that I'm going to be talking about just real quickly was from there. But we're migrating some of that great work and some of our partners and everything to the Institute because really what we want to do is to be well situated here in the greater Houston region, but we want to be in those national and statewide conversations as well. So with all of the challenges that we have that we're facing, we thought, we need to set up this Houston Healthy Cities program. Learned a lot along the way. So I'll share a few of those. But as we look at this, sometimes what happens is when you work in cities or suburban centers, your work is called urban conservation or something along those lines. And the truth is, When we work with nature-based solutions, we're working across this transect. So if you drew a red line all the way from the city center, from U of H's central campus, all the way down to Galveston, this is a woven landscape. What happens upstream definitely impacts downstream. The choices that are being made in downtown Houston impact rural communities, and the ecology is all connected, the economy is connected, the people are connected. So when we talk about nature-based solutions in this region, we really have a transect from the truly, truly urbanized down to some more wild places in more rural environments. And so, in many ways, what we're going to do is we're going to stay very well connected with what's happening on the coast. There are some amazing groups and individuals working on the coast, and we're here to support that. There's some amazing conservation efforts that are happening around the greater Houston region, particularly to the northwest, including the creation of new state parks, hopefully here within the next few years. But our sweet spot as an urban research university is really going to be kind of in that urban to suburban zone. That's a place where there's a great need to find solutions and to amplify solutions that can cut across the board and can connect the awesomeness of what's happening on the coast in terms of nature and nature-based solutions with conservation. So our sweet spot is going to be kind of the middle of that and connecting in with all of that work. Fortunately, we have this source code. We have local ecologies which have been here and situated for tens of thousands of years, evolving in this area. They are highly resilient, but they in themselves are at risk. They themselves are under pressure. But this source code is really, really critical. It not only shows us what is possible, but it provides us with seed sources, with technical expertise from people who are already working in these systems. And these systems can be, the plants and the techniques can be transferred into urban and suburban areas and are being done every day. So, one quick distinction between my early work in conservation and now where I am and where the Institute is heading is that because we know that people can't be healthy unless the environment around them is healthy, and because we know that there are all of these interconnections between environmental health and biodiversity health and human health, we're really trying to situate our work in a One Health framework. So, what that means is that we're trying to focus kind of the interventions that we're focusing on in the dead center of that Venn diagram. So, in a practical way, what that means is that if we're going to choose a tree palette for a neighborhood, um, if the neighborhood is super, super hot, we might be tempted to just pick a bunch of really quickly growing species from somewhere around the world, get some shade up as fast as possible for the human beings. But it may not benefit the wildlife. It may not benefit the long-term stability of the system also. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to really lean into solutions, nature-based solutions, which benefit the humans and the non-humans in that community positively as much as we can. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. But what this does is it also opens up a bigger conversation that's bigger than conservation to say, at its base, nature is a very, it's the largest thing there is literally, but it is much larger than the field of conservation, even though conservation is still bedrock for us in terms of our understanding and the technical expertise and all of that stuff. One Health provides us with an opportunity, and there's a lot of people that are very interested in this. We're helping to lead the new Harris County One Health Action Hub. And it's because I think it speaks to people and where they might be sitting right now as well. And I can talk to you all about that later on. So one thing that we did with this One Health Index is if we're going to use this as a framework, maybe what we need to do is be able to map what a community looks like in terms of the totality of the health there. So not just the human health, but what does the biodiversity health look like? What does the environmental, the quality of the air, water, and soil look like? So putting all the health on one map for the first time. So this is the first One Health Index that we know of in the country. We just presented at the World Conference for Ecological Restoration, and we'll be talking with the World Wildlife Fund and some other people here very soon. But this really kind of changes how you work because if humans and wildlife and the quality of the air, water, and soil are part of the equation in terms of stakeholders, this definitely, I've done a lot of planning and a lot of work in communities, changes your lens and it changes the decision points that you might make. So it's not a trivial thing that you're kind of shifting the lens a little bit. All right. let's get into a few more things and then we'll go ahead and open up for questions. One of the challenging things about Houston, but also one of the great opportunities, is that we have a lot of underperforming landscapes. And these landscapes are not just giant moat areas that could be used for something else, they include parking lots and they include rooftops that are not optimized to reflect heat or to capture water. So, in a lot of ways, we have two issues here in Houston. We have surfaces and we have time. And what I mean by that is, if you drive around the city long enough, you're going to find out that many of the surfaces that we have either accumulate heat and shed water very quickly during a storm, or they themselves are causing air pollution that might not be necessary, or other impacts that are deleterious to environmental health or biodiversity. So Houston is not singular in the fact that we have gigantic moat areas or parking lots, but when you add it all together, what you have is a city and a region that is hotter than it needs to be, less spongy than it needs to be, less wildlife rich than it could be, and less healthy than it absolutely should be. So, what do we do with these underperforming surfaces? Well, we can use the power of nature in ways that are helpful. The other thing, time, that I will say is, we do have flooding issues, obviously, but a lot of that's about time. Are we allowing the water to settle in, slow down, and give our rivers, our bayous, and creeks enough time to move water out of the way? Or are we shedding it so quickly because of the ways in which we've designed communities, but also that the surfaces are not absorbing as much water as we can? Are our surfaces as spongy as they can be? And in a lot of cases, they're absolutely not. They could be much more spongy. So how do we get there? Like I said, nature-based solutions, in a very common parlance, is just practical ways of partnering with nature instead of against it to solve these challenges. And they can come in a lot of different flavors. But the good thing is that they are scalable, they are translatable. You can kind of simplify some natural systems to get where you need. And in a place like Houston, those nature-based solutions go all the way from cattle ranches on our northwest side to down on this barrier island called Galveston Island. And there are different flavors all along the right way that have different values and different functions. And so the good thing is we have the ecologies that are necessary, we have many of the techniques, but there are barriers that are keeping us from fully activating this. So just real quickly, this is an old growth prairie. This is one of the most rare ecosystems on planet Earth. U of H is very proud to hold one of the last old growth prairies in the greater Houston region. It's called the UH Coastal Center. It is an amazing wonderland. If you're an ecologist, you're like, wow. The first time I saw this was in 1998 when I was meeting with the then director, Dr. Glenn Allman, who really founded this place. This is the source code for everything that we're going to be doing in terms of ancient grasslands helping with urban resiliency in our region. And so what I'll say is step one in nature and nature-based solutions is save the last best wild relics of ancient ecologies. There are a lot of groups working on that. We will be interacting with them. That's not going to be our focal point, but we will be working on amplifying some of their efforts as we can. But step one is save as much nature as you can from the outset so you're not having to retrofit. Step two is to think about surfaces and to think about moments and opportunities. So this is not a comprehensive list of everything that you could do in a community, either a built community or an unbuilt community. But there are many different places and spaces that you could activate so that they collect more water, they cool the surfaces, they improve interactions between human beings and civic spaces and things like that. So I'm just going to show you a few examples just real quickly. So one of the things we can do is we can take a rural prairie like the almond prairie at the UH Coastal Center, and we can make urban pocket prairies. And I've been doing this for about 10 years now, including the MD Anderson Prairie. I've worked on the Memorial Park Land Bridge and Prairie Project and other projects. And this has an immense amount of value. It reduces emissions from mowing. We typically go from about 20 to 26 mowings a year down to one. It improves the permeability of the soil. So instead of shedding water like a lawn does after about a half inch of rain, it can absorb about 4 inches of rain. So it becomes a much spongier thing. It reduces urban heat island impacts. It produces wildlife habitat that is really spectacular, even in the middle of the city. And it also connects people to their Texas heritage, right? So many of the things that we think about in terms of being Texan, cowboys, and blue bonnets and all that stuff are kind of laden here. So you're also doing placemaking when you do this the right way. Recently, we had a harvest of the almond prairie, and so what we're going to be able to do is actually bring seeds into cities, into suburbs, into this context to restore prairies like we did in Memorial Park. So urban grasslands like this is the MD Anderson Prairie in the middle of the Texas Medical Center. It's about to be finally replaced by a building. This was always supposed to be temporary, but we've gotten a lot of usage out of it. This site has really been a testing lab over the years, a training center over the years for what to do with urban grasslands. And this is not just a local, but like a national uh, place. I brought landscape architects from around the country here to see how this was done. It's influenced a lot of different things. And if you look at the infrared of this, purple is cooler. The more purple, the cooler. The more kind of white yellow, the hotter. So I think that a lot of people, when they think about cooling cities and suburbs, they only think about trees as a nature-based solutions. Great thing is that urban grasslands, urban wetlands can do very much the same thing. So you can see a side by side there. You could take a cue and plant material from a rural wetland and create things like an urban bioswale. Now, green stormwater infrastructure and flavors come in many different varieties, from rain gardens, which are very lightly engineered, to a bioswale, which has an entire underlayer of engineered soil and irrigation and all kinds of things that help it to function. But in many ways, it appears very naturalistic, and it serves as good habitat. It slows the water down. It cleans the water before it sends it out to a local bayou or river, and it's scalable. I've seen very small rain gardens, for instance, that are no bigger than like a bathtub, to fairly large installations in some of our public parks. So wetlands are scalable. Forests. This is one thing that we need a lot more of. We need literally millions of trees in the region. So one of the big things we're going to have to solve for is, how do we afford trees at a time of resource constriction? So as the Institute works, conservation finance or nature-based solutions finance is going to have to be one of the big things that we work on, because all of our partners are asking us to work with them to help sort out new ways of funding very fundamental work. Fortunately, our southern pine oak forest can be scaled down into things like this Miyawaki or pocket forest. They can be scaled down in terms of restorations that are done in neighborhoods. So all of these things are very scalable, but a couple of the challenges here for the Institute to work alongside people with are finance, but also the story. So sometimes, even though we want to do this work, even though we have the funding for this work, perceptions in the general public about what is a proper type of landscape versus an improper type of landscape for their area can become a barrier. And so it's working with communities to better understand their notions of nature and nature-based solutions, where it's appropriate, what aesthetics mean versus performance, and what are the costs of not doing a more resilient landscape. So there are many costs that come with it, not just financial, but health-wise and resilience-wise. So when I talked about those urban grasslands, perfect case in point. A lot of people are like, "You're going to grow what? Tall grass in my neighborhood, or my on my college campus, or the hospital?" So what I always tell people is stories and perception are upstream of everything. They're upstream of policy, they're upstream of finance, they're upstream of techniques, they're upstream of implementation, maintenance, whatever it is. So there are two big bodies of work right there, working on the finance, but working on the story. So we're going to be working with the hobby school here in the spring on a survey to extend on some work that I was doing at the Nature Conservancy with really great partners at Harris County Flood Control and the Coastal Prairie Conservancy to get a better handle on what are some of the ways in which to engage the general public about these very different looking landscapes than traditional landscapes, so that we can have better informed conversations, so that when we go to communities and we look to partner with them, we'll be in a better position. Because what I always tell people is if the city doesn't physically look different, it won't behave any differently in the next disaster. It has to physically look different. But in order to do that, we have to rely on communities to work alongside us and to champion this work. But there's a story issue to work on there. So I've been working on that for years, and we're going to forward that work here at UH. One of the things that we got to do earlier this year on Halloween is to assemble an incredibly gifted group of experts from across disciplines for a tour of four sites along Breeze Bayou. And we were looking at it from an economic development standpoint, health, workforce development, resiliency, biodiversity conservation, and other ways. And we visited a couple places that have a lot of meaning. This is kind of a storybook graphic arts description of a one place that I've grown to know and love. But some neighborhoods are left behind in terms of things like tree plantings. And when that happens, heat obviously rises. So I've done a lot of heat mapping with Harris County, City of Houston, other partners. Nature goes away. And this can lead to both things that you might expect, like stress and poor health outcomes, even for expectant mothers. In this case, when as heat rises, expectant mothers suffer, but can also increase violent crime rates. Things that you wouldn't necessarily think of when you lack trees, sometimes violent crime rates go up. So the way to get around this is by doing lots of different policies, not just nature-based solutions, cooling centers, white roofs, things like that. But if you reduce the amount of heat, then you have a chance of doing some really great things. So this community is called Gulfton. It's an area that I lived in when I was in as an undergrad here. It's the only reason I finished my degree at UH, because I could find affordable housing. It's the densest neighborhood in the state. It's the most diverse neighborhood in the state. It's our Ellis Island. But it has a nature score of 28.7, which is extraordinarily low out of 100, which means that it puts people at risk for many, many different things. This is a typical streetscape. And if you look at it through a thermal camera, it is the hottest neighborhood in the city that we mapped both in 2020 and 2024. That means all sorts of downhill effects start to take place. People literally can have a heat stroke waiting for the bus. Medications, if you're older or if you're on medications for something, they work less effectively. Like I said, crime rates spike during the summer because of the added heat load. So we went out and we worked with Texas A&M Forest Service to map like every place a tree could go. And we worked with the community and many partners on this Greener Gulfton plan. But at the end of the day, some of those barriers in terms of affording trees, how do you work on working with the community in terms of the story and how that works? How do you get the community involved in terms of careers in reforesting or adding more nature-based solutions? All of those things are still there. So I'm going to speed up just a little bit because I know that I want to save some time. So basically, there are lots of conversations happening right now about how do we afford millions of trees at a time of resource constriction. So we're going to be using traditional tree planting methods, but we're also going to have to incorporate some things like rewilding, which is used in a broader scale in rural environments, but how can we bring that in the city? Fortunately, natural experiments are already happening around the city. These are happy accidents that we're hoping to do some research on, hoping to mimic in some ways. These are areas where nature's taking back some things, but layered in there are all sorts of challenges and things that a university like ours can work with partners on. I'll show you this last example, and then we'll get to the questions. Here's another, what I call, oh really, or One Health moment. A lot of our campuses, which are the biggest piece of public infrastructure that we have, are really boring. They're mowed a lot. Interest from students going inside is pretty low. The wildlife habitat is almost zero. And it becomes this place that has very hard soils, so it doesn't absorb much rain. The maintenance of it means that there's lots of unhealthy air around because of the way that we're maintaining these. But we could grow it differently. We don't have to have very highly manicured campuses and parks and everything everywhere. So one of the things that I worked on previously was this project out in Ailey called the Jefferson Early Learning Center. I was out there just yesterday, where we took most of the campus out of lawn. This was from the design standpoint. And we created these, and this was early in the restoration, so it's filled out now. We used that ancient seed from an ancient prairie to restore these huge prairie basins. And we planted about 400 trees. So I joke with people sometimes to say that what we did is we created a state park and then put a preschool in the middle of it. Most of the kids don't live in places with a yard. They're mostly apartment dwellers, mostly lower socioeconomic. So, in many ways, the nature fix that they need to lead these healthy lives, they find at the school. So, in terms of the size of the challenges that we have for nature-based solutions, this is a good example of one where green stormwater, ancient prairies, and ancient forests kind of all come together. So I will leave you with this last thing right here, and then we will talk. One of the big ambitions that we have at the Institute is to play a leading role in the development and transference of expertise in nature and nature-based solutions. We think the UH Coastal Center can be a regional hub for this exact sort of training, knowing that a lot of the work is going to happen in communities, both the unbuilt communities and the communities that already exist that need more nature. But the big call here is we're going to need nature at scale everywhere in order to become more resilient, healthier, both mentally and physically. And we want to play a role in getting that done. And so we're really in the moment of refining our strategies so that we can fit that unique niche and we can unlock a lot of doorways as well to get there as we can. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I know that we don't have tons of time, but I just want to open it up knowing that I put my email in the chat. I didn't even have a chance to talk about the Green Corridor project that myself and Debelina are working on for the World Cup 26. We were just at a press conference this morning. It was very exciting. So we're working on lots of different things, but I just wanted to give a broad overview. And now I just want to turn it back over to Debelina. Any questions in the chat, or if you guys have any questions?